Hi, folks. We now move on to Simone de Beauvoir, the fifth and final philosopher from our class. Beauvoir is my favorite of the French existentialists. So she, Sartre, and Camus are often grouped together because they share so many similar philosophical ideas and they heavily influenced each other. So they were three amazing philosophers all living in Paris at the same time, hanging out in the cafes, smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee and talking existentialism all the time. They were all famous fiction writers, authors as well. So Beauvoir's novel, The Mandarins, won the Prix Goncourt. That's the highest award for fiction in France. It's like winning the National Book Award. So she was a famously recognized author at the same time in which she basically had two philosophical careers. We're going to read her existentialist works, Pierce and Sénès and the Ethics of Ambiguity. But 2 years later from that, she writes The Second Sex, which is one of the foundational texts for modern feminism. And I highly encourage you, if you're interested in reading that work, to take our philosophy of feminism class. It's one of the most important works in the history of philosophy, in my opinion. Now, when you read Kierkegaard, when we started this class, you didn't have much of a knowledge and background in existentialism to draw on. But now that we've gotten to the final philosopher from the class, what I want you to do is think about the conceptual space and everything you know about existentialism already as you read Beauvoir and try to understand what her relation is to these other philosophers. Because now that existentialism has, in a sense, come of age in its French period, these existentialists, Beauvoir knows Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard and Nietzsche. She's read all of their works. So the French existentialists are sometimes famous as this is what people think of when they think of existentialism, because they were the first people who actually had a sense of the history, the trajectory of existentialism, and could self-consciously interact with those works and define their own positions with regard to it. For example, other questions you can ask, you know our routine. We want to look at each of these authors and see what do they put forward as exemplars of the human condition for what is the most authentic or greatest way we could live. Or by contrast, what are the forms of despair that Beauvoir recognizes? What are the problematic ways of being in the world that she wants to criticize? So keep all of your background knowledge that you've hard-earned in this class as you read Beauvoir. One thing you'll notice, hopefully, is that she has a sense, an understanding of the human condition that has a lot of commonality with everyone else that we've read. So this idea that we have a duality or a problematic aspect to ourselves, which we have to reconcile. We've seen this in Pascal, Kierkegaard, Dostoevsky. Everyone that we've read recognizes this is partly what makes the human condition difficult. Beauvoir takes this on and forefronts it and tells us this aspect of the human condition is essential to understanding existentialism and what is difficult about it. So you can see, finally, I can sort of divulge to you, my whole approach to existentialism in this class is heavily influenced by Beauvoir's way of thinking about it and the terms in which she understands the history of existentialism. So this idea that we're both rational and animals, we have a foot in two worlds, the world of the internal and the mind and consciousness, and also the external world, the world of things and physical forces and other people that push us about. And this is a liability. This is something that we have to reconcile or come to terms with. She calls it the tragic ambiguity of our condition. So when Beauvoir says ambiguity, and the title of the work is The Ethics of Ambiguity, what she's talking about is this sense in which the human condition has two halves. We are not a unified self, but we are an ambiguous self who is eternally seeking after their own unity. That is what makes our lives difficult. So you can think of all of these terms Beauvoir has given us falling into two broad categories. And what we have to do is get a sense of what values we're going to live our lives by in light of our ambiguous situation. And what Beauvoir is going to tell us, if you're paying attention to the title, is that we can actually live ethically. The authentic way to live is the ethical way to live. This is going to be essential to her message. Let me tell you, there's one technical term that the French existentialists use a lot, and it's this concept of facticity. Partly this is a reference to some of the other German existentialists who we're skipping over, most famously Heidegger. Facticity is just the fact that we exist in the physical world, drawn by physical forces, subject to the world of the body. And as Beauvoir is going to tell us, that allows us to realize our freedom, or it allows us to also be oppressed by the freedom of others. So hopefully you can see how this conception of the human condition that we're getting from the first couple of pages of Beauvoir really, for example, rings true to Dostoevsky's conception of the human condition that we get in The Brothers Karamazov. And just like Beauvoir is going to say that what we have to do to have an ethics of ambiguity is not to deny either side of ourselves, but we have to come to some sort of unity, which brings both together. Think of how similar this is to Dostoevsky's idea that what we need to do is not engage in pure sensuality like Theodore, or pure asceticism like Father Ferapont, but we need to somehow synthesize these aspects of ourselves and find a way of unifying, becoming whole, becoming saved. So Beauvoir says something very similar, and you can again see how my reading of Dostoevsky is influenced by her way of understanding the importance of existentialism. She says, you know, predecessors, what people have done in philosophy and religion is they have tried to eliminate one of the sides. They've tried to eliminate the body or the soul. They've gone for one or the other. And this is deeply problematic and is futile. And instead, what she's going to set out to do is actually assume that our ambiguous state is fundamental to who we are. It is ineradicable. And what we need to do is see what kind of values we can live by in light of taking our ambiguity as essential to who we are. Here's one quote that shows you her awareness of the tradition. I love the fact that she draws this directly. She recognizes that Kierkegaard himself was aware of this ambiguity. And exactly Kierkegaard's fight with Hegel, which we saw in Fear and Trembling, was the idea that for Hegel, philosophy only recognizes what is rational. And in a sense, even though Hegel takes himself to be a Christian, that eliminates one half of ourselves. That attempt to rational purity doesn't leave room for the rest of what it is to be human, our passionate side. It takes pure soul and leaves nothing of our bodily passions. It's another form of asceticism, essentially. And this is what Beauvoir is going to, again, counsel us against. But what I want you to do, even though she shares a similar idea of the human condition to her predecessors, what I want you now to do is pay attention not just to those commonalities, but what does she add that we haven't yet seen in Kierkegaard and Dostoevsky and Nietzsche, that it's going to define another space in the conceptual space that we have to decide if we find it compelling or not. Okay, thanks.